Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We like to really dig into a topic, and today we're going to be digging into the Federal Reserve.
Oh yeah, this will be a good one.
It will be. We're going to be looking at excerpts from Secrets of the Federal Reserve Bank by Eustace Mullins.
Right.
This book, just to give you a little background, is an exposé that explores the origins and operations of the Federal Reserve.
hmm
So we're really going to be looking at some of the power dynamics
Yeah.
and the hidden influences behind its creation and how it came to be.
Yeah.
So to really set the stage for this deep dive, imagine, if you will, a gathering of some of the most powerful bankers of their time.
Okay.
They meet in absolute secrecy on Jekyll Island
Oh wow.
back in 1910
Back in 1910.
to discuss a plan that would shape the entire financial landscape of the United States for generations to come.
I mean that sounds like the start of like a spy thriller or something.
It really does, like a conspiracy thriller.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where our deep dive begins, with the story of the Federal Reserve. So, what can you tell us about this meeting on Jekyll Island, and why was it shrouded in such secrecy?
Well, Mullins really uses this meeting on Jekyll Island as like the starting point for understanding the Federal Reserve. Like you said, it's all very hush-hush. He really emphasizes the secrecy surrounding it.
Yeah.
The attendees included people like Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was a very powerful figure deeply connected to the banking industry, and also representatives from major institutions like Kuhn, Loeb & Co.
Oh, wow.
and J.P. Morgan. So very big names.
Yeah, big players.
Huge players, yeah.
Right.
They came together to draft what became known as the Aldrich Plan. And this plan laid the groundwork for a central banking system in the United States.
Now, why would something like that require so much secrecy? What's the big deal?
Well, the idea of a central bank had always faced a lot of resistance in the past in
Yeah.
America. So they knew that they had to tread carefully. I mean, you can imagine the public outcry if they knew that these powerful bankers were meeting in secret.
Yeah, plotting.
Yeah, plotting to potentially control the nation's money.
So that makes sense. So what exactly did the Aldrich Plan propose, and why was there so much resistance to this idea of a central bank?
Okay, so the Aldrich Plan essentially proposed a central banking system that would have control over the nation's money supply. It would set interest rates and really just have a huge influence on the financial system. But the idea of concentrating so much financial power in the hands of one central authority, that really worried a lot of people.
Of course.
They were concerned about potential manipulation, abuse of power, the possibility of this central bank serving its own interests rather than the public's.
So if there was so much opposition to the Aldrich Plan, how in the world did it evolve into the Federal Reserve Act that we know today?
Well, that's a key question that Mullins explores in his book. He argues that even though the Aldrich Plan was initially rejected, it was strategically repackaged and reintroduced under different names by both the Democratic and Republican parties.
Oh, wow.
And this deliberate kind of obfuscation, it really created confusion among the public because they couldn't easily follow the thread. They couldn't easily understand the true purpose and implications of what was being proposed.
So it's like the idea was rejected, but then they kind of snuck it back in through the back door.
Exactly. Like a Trojan horse, It was the same core idea, just dressed up differently.
Wow. So we essentially have this situation where powerful figures meet in secret to draft a plan, which then gets rejected publicly.
Right.
Then it gets repackaged and passed under a different name. And through all of this, it seems like there's a lot of, deception going on.
There's definitely something going on. And what's even more interesting is that Mullins points out that some of the key figures who were involved in crafting that original Aldrich Plan, people like Aldrich himself and Frank Vanderlip, who represented the Rockefeller banking interests at Jekyll Island, they publicly denounced the Federal Reserve Act.
Oh, wow.
They came out and said, we don't support this.
So the very people who came up with the plan then denounced the very thing that they created.
Well, according to Mullins, they did this to try to distance themselves
Wow.
from the final product and to make it seem like the Federal Reserve Act was something completely different from what they originally proposed.
So it's almost like a magician's trick or something. A sleight of hand.
Yeah, very much so.
Wow.
And this really raises the question, who was really pulling the strings? What were their goals?
Sure, what was the end game here?
Exactly. And that's something we'll delve into a bit later. Mullins makes some pretty interesting claims about the real forces behind the American banking system.
Oh, I'm intrigued. This is getting good.
It gets even better, trust me.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and explore those hidden influences that you're talking about.
Mullins doesn't just stop at the creation of the Fed. He goes deeper. He says to really understand it, you gotta look beyond America, across the Atlantic,
Oh, okay. Where are we going?
to a European banking dynasty, super powerful, the House of Rothschild.
The Rothschilds. I knew it. Every time you talk about big money conspiracies, their name pops up. What's their connection to the Fed, though?
Mullins paints them as a hidden hand, shaping the whole American banking system from behind the scenes. He talks about how they financed the Union in the Civil War.
Wow.
They set up big firms like J.P. Morgan and Kuhn, Loeb, that kind of thing.
So is he saying American banking, and by extension the Fed, was always under European influence from the start?
Yeah, that's his argument. And he takes it further. He introduces this idea of the London connection.
London connection. Okay, I'm all ears. What is that?
So Mullins says it's this network, right? International bankers, mostly based in London, and they control the U.S. financial system
Hold on, how?
through the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They own shares.
So not only did they influence the Fed's creation, but these foreign banks still have a grip on it today.
That's what Mullins argues. He even names names, big institutions, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, Lazard Brothers, J. Henry Schroeder, S.G. Warburg, Brown Brothers Harriman.
It's like a who's who of global finance. That begs the question, though, whose interests does the Fed really serve? Are they looking out for Americans, or is it all about these foreign powers pulling the strings?
That's the heart of Mullins' argument, isn't it? He wants us to think, is the Fed truly independent, working for America, or are they beholden to foreign interests?
It's a heavy thought. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of the Fed. Mullins talks a lot about them creating money. How does that even work? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
All right, imagine the Fed wants more money floating around. They go to banks and buy stuff, government securities, but instead of paying with real money, they make new money electronically, poof, and add it to the bank's accounts.
So they just type some numbers and boom, more money exists. That seems like a magic trick with potentially dangerous consequences.
It's a lot of power, that's for sure. Mullins calls this open market operations, and it's how the Fed steers the economy. But he's skeptical about it. He says creating money without any real backing, like gold or something, causes inflation and messes things up.
And if those foreign groups Mullins talked about really do have influence, doesn't that make it worse? Could they be using the Fed to print money for their benefit, not America's?
That's what Mullins wants us to consider. He's not saying the Fed is out to destroy America, but he points out the possibility of conflicts of interest. And the Fed's not exactly an open book, are they? Lots of secrecy, not much accountability.
This is fascinating, really makes you think. So we've got this power to create money, potential foreign meddling. But how has this played out in reality? Has the Fed's power actually hurt Americans in the past?
Mullins argues that all this power the Fed has, combined with the lack of transparency and that potential for foreign influence, has actually had a huge impact on American history, and not always good.
Okay, give me an example.
He points to the Great Depression. He says it's evidence of how the Fed's policies can have really devastating consequences for everyday people.
That's a big claim. How does he connect the Fed to the Great Depression?
Well, he says their policies in the 1920s, especially keeping interest rates really low, created this bubble in the stock market. People were borrowing like crazy to buy stocks. Prices went way up, too high, it couldn't last.
So, like, the Fed's actions accidentally set the stage for a huge crash.
That's his argument. And then, get this, when the crash did happen, what did the Fed do? They made things worse.
So what did they do?
Instead of making credit easier to, helping businesses and people stay afloat, they did the opposite. They shrunk the money supply, made interest rates higher. Mullins says that made the Depression way deeper and longer than it needed to be.
Why would they do that? It seems like the opposite of what they should have done.
Mullins thinks they were protecting the banks, the big financial players, not the everyday American. By tightening things up, yeah, maybe some banks didn't collapse, but regular people and businesses couldn't get loans to survive.
So, according to this book, the Fed basically helped cause the Depression and then made it worse because they weren't looking out for the little guy.
That's a simplified version, but yeah, that's the gist of his argument. Makes you wonder, how many other times have their policies hurt people without us even realizing it? It's all about accountability, right?
Right. If they have this much power, shouldn't we know they're using it the right way? Does Mullins have any solutions? What does he think should happen instead?
He's a big believer in backing money with real stuff, like gold or silver. He says that would make the system more disciplined, less room for the kind of manipulation that the Fed gets up to.
Makes sense. Like, they can't just create endless money. if it has to be tied to actual gold, right?
Exactly. He says a gold-backed currency would protect regular people from inflation because the Fed couldn't just print their way out of problems.
It's interesting to think about this with all that talk about cryptocurrency these days. Like, Mullins wouldn't have known about Bitcoin, but his worries about power and banks controlling everything, that really echoes what a lot of crypto people say.
Absolutely. It shows how relevant Mullins' work still is. This book's from over 70 years ago, but his questions about money, power, how the system works, they're more important now than ever.
It's been quite a journey, this deep dive. We've gone through the history of the Federal Reserve, all the secrets, the power plays. Really makes you think differently about money and the institutions that control it.
And who benefits? Right. We haven't necessarily answered every question, but hopefully we've sparked some curiosity in our listeners. There's always more to learn, more to dig into when it comes to the Fed.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Federal Reserve. Always keep those questions coming, folks. Until next time.